Hi everyone, welcome to this video about the plot of The Taming of the Shrew. This video is mainly aimed at A-level students, but it can also be useful if you are studying the play for a different course or a different level. Very simply, I'm going to go through the 14 scenes of the play, giving you in bullet points the main things that happen, and I'll be discussing it along the way. So we're going to start with the induction scene 1. It's important to think of the induction because it is still part of the play, even though we don't see any of the main characters yet. Induction scene 1 begins with a lord returning from hunting. This is, of course, after Sly has been thrown out of a pub because he caused a little bit of damage because of his drunken state. And it's coincidental. A lot of the time, comedy is about coincidence. It's just very coincidental that the Lord just happens to be riding his horse down the same street where Sly is passed out in the gutter. And what the Lord does is the Lord opportunistically decides to use the drunk Christopher Sly to play a prank for entertainment. And that prank, of course, is to make Sly believe that he is in fact a lord. This induction scene reminds us that transformation is a key theme in this play, and also the use of clothing is important as well, as I have said in previous videos, because in comedy clothing is often synonymous with creating disguise and deception. So having watched this first scene, it's pretty obvious to an audience that we are in fact watching a comedy and not a tragedy. Following on from that, in the next scene, induction scene 2, Sly wakes up, and while he has been unconscious, he has been surrounded by lots of wealthy and quite extravagant things like artwork and food and drink and so on. He's also now wearing, of course, a lord's attire. He has been dressed while he was unconscious, in clothes that he has no need to wear because of his lower status. Initially, Sly is a little bit, I suppose, dismissive. He doesn't believe that he is a lord. Of course, he's right. But eventually, the men break him down, and Sly's gullibility is foregrounded because he does, in fact, believe he is a lord by the middle of the scene. Of course, this increases dramatic irony because Sly, as the lower class, uncultivated character, is very much the figure of ridicule and the archetypal fool in these scenes. Finally, in induction scene 2, Bartholomew, who is the Lord's page or servant character, dresses up as a woman in order to play Sly's wife. And of course, this again reinforces the fact that this is a play about characters crossing over boundaries and that theme again of transformation. So far we've had 2 scenes, and we've also had 2 examples of cross-dressing or disguise. And that's the last time we see these characters. The idea is that they will watch The Taming of the Shrew along with the audience. So in some productions, these characters stay on stage throughout the whole of the performance. One interpretation of this induction, because we don't see these characters again, is that Shakespeare lost the end of it, where Sly realises that he has been had a prank put on him and he is not in fact a lord. And an alternative is that some people believe that The Taming of the Shrew, which the actors in this play come to perform for the Lord and Sly, is something that Sly would have been used to because of his lower uncultivated status. In other words, it's almost like a drunken fantasy that is put on for him, where he would associate with it in some way. So despite not seeing those characters again, that induction could come up as an extract, or it might come up as something you want to refer to in an essay. Act 1, Scene 1 is where the play begins really with the main characters. And some productions don't even perform the induction, so this might be the moment that the curtain comes up in some productions. So the first character we see is Lucentio, and Lucentio has arrived into Padua as a student, and his opening monologue is all about him professing to study hard and to study traditional subjects like physics and maths and literature and music and so on. He's accompanied by his loyal servant Tranio, who tells Lucentio not to become a slave to his studies, and he must also make time for some fun as well. Importantly, in terms of dramatic methods, Lucentio and Tranio then stand aside, and while they're stood at the side of the stage or even on the balcony in some productions, on the stage, Baptista and his two daughters appear, as well as Gremio and Hortensio. And it's revealed that Gremio and Hortensio are both suitors to Bianca, and they're angry with Baptista because they want Bianca, but Baptista is keeping her locked away, metaphorically at least, from any suitors until Kate, the older sister, is married. And because nobody wants to marry Kate because of her shrewish behaviour, it seems that Bianca will always be oppressed or locked away forever. Lucentio, of course, realises from this interaction that he oversees and overhears that he has rivals for Bianca. So Lucentio, being struck by Cupid's arrow, he forgets all about studying relatively quickly, at least studying traditional subjects, and for the rest of the play Lucentio becomes a student of love and a student of courtship. He spends the rest of the play learning the art of love. He also knows, of course, that if he's going to get Bianca, he's going to have to be quick about it because there's already two suitors interested in her, and he wants the prize. So he's going to have to think of a way to do that. And the way in which they do that is, of course, using the school tutor device as a way to gain access to inside Baptista's house before he really should do. So skillfully, Lucentio overheard that Baptista wants school tutors for his daughters. Lucentio uses that resourcefully and skillfully as a way of getting into the house as soon as possible. And that's also what Hortensio does a bit later as well. Tranio, of course, is very important. So despite Tranio being the lovable rogue character or sometimes the archetypal fool character, he does have a lot of loyalty to Lucentio, and he helps Lucentio out a lot in terms of getting the love interest, which comedy is often about. So this is the third scene, and we now have had 4 examples of cross-dressing and disguise. And again, the audience, of course, has got to remember all of this in order to get meaning. Towards the end of the scene, Hortensio and Gremio pledge to work together to get a husband for Kate. They both admit they're in the same position, and they say they'll even pay money if necessary to find a man stupid enough to marry Kate. They don't have to wait that long, of course, because coincidentally Petruchio arrives pretty much the next scene, so they don't have to wait too long. So that scene is all about really setting up the two sisters, how they're different, who has all the interest, of course, which is Bianca, and setting up the subplot. And in this play, the subplot tends to be where most of the comic relief tends to happen, which acts almost as a juxtaposition with the main Taming plot, which has the darker undercurrents and aspects of arguably sexism and misogyny in it. Following the scene, Petruchio arrives. So this scene is all about establishing the character of Petruchio. And he also arrives with his lackey or his servant Gremio, again another lovable rogue character who is important for the creation of comic relief. Petruchio has come to Padua from Verona, in his words, in order to see the world and also to wive it wealthily. So part of his mission, I think, when he travels, is to find a wife and also to get richer. He's already rich because his father Antonio has died, and he wants more money. So Petruchio in this scene is established as being quite materialistic and also power hungry, and also perhaps arrogant and egotistical. He's of course the Il Capitano stock character from the Commedia dell'arte form of Italian theatre. After the initial repartee about knocking at the gate, which Gremio gets confused with, he does agree to woo Kate very, very quickly. And part of this suggests that Petruchio is using Kate as a way to prove his reputation as a strongman. Towards the end of the scene, Tranio arrives. Of course, we've now got to remember that he is Lucentio. So he looks different, and sometimes he speaks different as well, as he's mimicking Lucentio's kind of exaggerated, eloquent language. And he pretends to be interested in Bianca. He approaches the other men at the end of that scene, and he becomes the third suitor. Of course, we've got to remember as an audience, he doesn't actually want Bianca. He's doing this for his master Lucentio. So we have to remember that when we see him competing, it seems, for Bianca. Act 2, Scene 1 is the only scene in Act 2, and it's a long scene, therefore. And it's useful to split that into several sections. The first section is Kate and Bianca fighting on stage. Bianca has her hands tied, and Kate in some productions also hits her and is really presented and reinforced as the bully. Baptista then enters just in time to see Bianca being tortured by Kate, and of course, because Bianca is Baptista's favourite daughter, he tells Bianca to go inside and tells Kate to go away, essentially, or to stay outside. And Kate perhaps is the only character that realises that Bianca is emotionally manipulative and has her father wrapped around her little finger. Petruchio then enters, and the chat quickly turns to dowries. There is no romance in this play, really, at least initially. This is not a romantic play. It's a play about money and marriage as a money-making institution. So because Petruchio knows that Kate has a wealthy dowry, conversation quickly turns to money. Hortensio is also presented by Petruchio as a tutor. Hortensio's first student is Kate, and that's why he is assaulted with the lute across his face. After this, Baptista says he can be Bianca's tutor, which is why he's quite happy with that, because that's what he wanted all along. Petruchio and Kate then meet, and you have that very quick-witted, quite feisty repartee between the two of them. And it ends with the wedding day being set, quite against Kate's will. She doesn't want to marry him. She calls him a mad-brained rudesby, meaning a bit of a lunatic. And Petruchio says, I don't want you to make out that you don't want to marry me. I want you to make everyone believe that you do. So he comes across as quite manipulative. And of course, it goes to show how women's destinies in this play at this time were very much to do with what men wanted. They go off stage quite unhappily in Kate's perspective, and the scene finishes with Tranio and Gremio bidding for Bianca, and this is where Baptista says he will play the merchant's part, meaning he's selling his younger daughter off to the highest bidder. So Gremio and Tranio have to list all of their wealth and their possessions, and the highest bidder will win Bianca. Not particularly loving. Again, Baptista can be played in two ways. He can either be seen as a victim who is fed up with his daughter, Kate, and is seen as a weak father. He can also be seen as a cruel or neglectful father who just wants to sell his daughters off as soon as possible because he's had enough of them. So there's two ways that you can view Baptista as the older character, and it's also worth noting that he is the character which the younger characters are trying to deceive, because he is the one that says Kate must marry first, and Lucentio is trying to find a way to deviate around that. Act 3, Scene 1 is about the subplot, and it's all about Bianca choosing Lucentio herself for her suitor. Lucentio is tutoring Bianca as Cambio. He's teaching her Latin, and Hortensio is tutoring her with music as the role of Licio. Hortensio doesn't have the eloquence or the romantic capabilities of Lucentio. Lucentio's wooing of Bianca in this scene is far more successful. Lucentio, in his wooing, in his lesson of Bianca, reveals his true identity. And Bianca does not run screaming. She does not go and tell her father. Bianca actually says, "Despair not," meaning she chooses Lucentio, and she quite likes the fact that a man has gone to such lengths in order to be with her. So Bianca, as another younger character, is also siding with the suitor, the deceptive suitor, rather than the father figure. She could have gone and told Baptista, but she doesn't. So from this point on, Bianca knows that Lucentio is a man in disguise for her. And Hortensio is rejected. He fluffs his wooing. He's very clumsy in his eloquence. and Bianca rejects Hortensio, leaving Lucentio as the only man or the only suitor in the race. So Act 3, Scene 1, relatively short scene, all about establishing the next stage of the subplot. Act 3, Scene 2, back to the main plot. The congregation are waiting in the church for Petruchio to arrive at his wedding. Remember, he has set the wedding day, Sunday, and yet he's late to it. And of course, he's late deliberately because it's part of his taming strategy. Kate runs off the stage humiliated, and in her absence, Biondello enters and, in a farcical and quite quick way, describes Petruchio and his horse before they actually arrive on stage. Petruchio is described as wearing lots of ridiculous rags, almost like dressing up as a clown character, and the horse has pretty much got everything wrong with it under the sun. It's not a heroic stallion that you would expect. It is pretty old and diseased. Biondello speaks in prose at this section as well. You can tell that by the right-hand margin of the text. It's all in a line. So Biondello, as a low-status character, often used for comic relief, again another fool character, speaks in prose. And it builds up the tension, because Biondello is a fool character, we always take what he says with a pinch of salt because he hasn't got the intellectual sharpness. However, shortly after, Petruchio does arrive, and he is in fact wearing exactly what Biondello says. In some productions, of course, they can't get a real horse on stage, so they will use Grumio as the horse figure, which provides some visual humour because he's often wearing ears and has a carrot in his mouth in some productions. So Petruchio chooses to become a clown for his wedding. He has rejected all symbolism of wealth and solemnity, which this ceremony provides, and he has almost voluntarily made himself a beggar, wearing these clothes, which is a nice link to Christopher Sly, who also goes the other way. Sly goes from beggar to lord, Petruchio goes from lord to beggar, so it's an interesting use of clothing again in this play, and again that theme of transformation. Kate is now beginning to speak a little bit less in this scene as well. She doesn't have the same lines that she had, and she doesn't speak really with the same level of aggression, because her aggression is always met with a consequence now. They have their ceremony, it happens off stage, and Grumio comes back and tells Tranio and Lucentio all about it. And it's obviously very farcical. Petruchio hits the priest, he throws wine in the sexton's face, he swears at the top of his voice, and so on. So this formality of this ceremony is completely broken for comedic effect. At the end, Petruchio quickly takes Kate to his house, and they begin journeying to Petruchio's house for Act 4. And they are both denied a wedding reception, the party. And of course, this shows Petruchio very eager to make Kate part of his property and to begin to tame her freely. The party, though, the wedding reception continues with the characters that stay in Padua. They just have the party without the bride and groom. So again, comedy, nothing is going to get in the way of that party atmosphere. This is where the interval usually takes place. And then we get into Act 4, Scene 1. And the setting is important because it takes place at Petruchio's house, his domain, where he has control. Petruchio and Kate actually enter halfway through this scene, and the scene begins with Grumio, who has sped ahead, talking with the servant, the head servant Curtis, about getting the house ready for their master's arrival. And Grumio also tells Curtis about what's happened as Kate and Petruchio travel back from the wedding. She has fallen off her horse, probably because he has spooked the horse, and she has been crawling through the mud. So when she does arrive, her hair is all messy, her dress is torn and muddy. So visually, it subverts again that serious, solemn wedding ceremony. What also happens in this scene when Petruchio does arrive, in keeping with his Il Capitano characterization, is he begins to beat and berate the servants quite viciously. So he will use lots of imperative sentences, lots of exclamative sentences, and lots of interrogative sentences to show who is in control. Again, this is probably all part of an act. He's acting here, because what he's trying to do is he's trying to show Kate the error of her ways, as well as who is the real Shrew now. The scene importantly ends with his soliloquy, where he talks about falconry and really outlines his taming manifesto, his taming plan to the audience. This is what he is doing. So as an audience, we know exactly what his game is. And I've done a separate video on that about analysing his soliloquy called Analysing Petruchio's Language. So you might want to look at that video if you want to analyse that soliloquy. But it is a very important soliloquy to look at, because it links to a lot of questions you might get in for an essay, for example, or in an exam. Act 4, Scene 2, back to the subplot. Lucentio and Bianca flirt quite freely under the guise of education. Of course, Lucentio is not a serious depiction of scholarly activity. He's actually just using that as a device to woo and flirt and so on. And importantly, this scene also goes to show Tranio's cunning, because he persuades a travelling merchant or pedant who isn't familiar with the area to be Vincentio. And of course, Tranio needs to do that because he needs a father figure to pretend to be Vincentio to approach Baptista for Bianca's hand in marriage. So this scene also goes to show how cunning and successful Tranio is as working with Lucentio's best interests at heart. So again, the subplot being seen as where the most of the comedic action takes place, perhaps at this part of the play. Act 4, Scene 3, back to the main plot. The scene begins with Grumio teasing Kate with food. Kate is very hungry, of course, at this point, and Grumio is not allowing her to eat. He's saying, you know, how about some tripe, how about some mutton, how about some beef, and then he just says, what about just the mustard? That winds her up, and she begins to kind of beat Grumio, and of course Petruchio enters at that point, deliberately to see that she's not yet tamed. The main part of this scene is the hat and the gown palaver. Petruchio has had a haberdasher and a tailor-made make a hat and gown. The hat and the gown has been made perfectly, but Petruchio, of course, is acting very audaciously and theatrically. He's making out that both garments are made poorly because he's testing Kate's compliance. He wants her to agree with him, but she doesn't, and therefore she gets neither hat nor gown. The scene finishes with another kind of trivial test. Basically, Petruchio says it's 7 o'clock in the evening. If we leave now to go back to Padua, we should be there at a certain amount of time. And Kate disagrees and says, actually, no, it's 2 o'clock, because it is 2 o'clock. But because she disagrees with him and doesn't say it's 7 o'clock like he wants her to, the consequence is they're not going to begin travelling back to Padua now. She's not yet tamed enough. So he's keeping her there. And at this point, she is starting to become aware of what's going on. She says in this scene, the more his spite appears, which means that she's realised that his behaviour and what happens is very much to do with what she says. So she's beginning to start to show signs that she is changing. And of course, as well at this moment, the amount of lines that she actually speaks begins to reduce quite drastically, because Petruchio is always the one that's getting all the words in. Act 4, Scene 4, back to the subplot. This is all about the pedant pretending to be Vincentio approaching Baptista for Bianca's hand in marriage. Baptista accepts the pedant's guarantee of Bianca's dower, and Baptista tells Cambio to instruct Bianca of her upcoming wedding. Of course, he doesn't know that Cambio is actually the man that wants to marry his daughter. So again, he still isn't aware of the real situation. So Tranio's scheme to use the pedant has worked, because again, they've been able to play on Baptista's gullibility and get what they want relatively easily. Final scene of Act 4 is back to the main plot. This is where Kate and Petruchio are journeying back to Padua. Journeying in a play can often be important metaphorically because it represents something that's transient, something that's changing, and of course that is Kate's level of compliance. And that is shown through the sun and the moon test, where Petruchio says the sun is the moon, and she disagrees at first, and that's met with, okay, we'll go back to my house then as the consequence. But she also has an epiphany in this scene where she realises that in order to get what she wants, she just has to say what he wants her to say, even if she knows it's factually inaccurate. So she has an epiphany, which is also known as an agnoresis. So this is the scene where she starts to show that she is now tamed. The second test in this scene is Vincentio. The real Vincentio enters. They encounter him as they're travelling. And Petruchio cons Kate into thinking that Vincentio is actually a virgin or a budding maiden. And he then changes his mind once Kate has agreed with him and says, actually, no, this man is old, withered. And she again takes the blame for her mad mistaking eyes. So by this point, Kate, it seems, is completely under the spell of Petruchio, even though what she's saying is completely factually and logically inaccurate. Final act, Act 5, Scene 1, again about the subplot mainly. Kate and Petruchio are there, but they are stood at the side of the stage watching all of this chaos and confusion unfold as all of the disguises that we've seen in the subplot come to an end. By this point, Lucentio and Bianca have gone to elope, and they appear on stage as a happily married couple, it seems. And the real Vincentio, Lucentio's father, comes face to face with the fake Vincentio, which is the pedant. And a very farcical scene ensues where they try and work out who is who. So there's lots of chaos and confusion, there's lots of shouting, there's lots of running around, the police get called, arrests are made. It's quite hard to keep track of on stage. But essentially this scene ends with Lucentio saying, I am the real Lucentio, I did this for Bianca, love wrought these miracles. So again, in a comedy, deception is met with a good intention. Tranio, Bindello and the pedant run off because they're probably going to get a slap round the face for what they did, but they're not going to be killed like they maybe would in a tragedy, and they are actually present in the end scene, so all is forgiven in the end. So this scene prepares us for the final scene, where in the final scene all characters are back to being their true selves. Finally, the end of the play, the resolution, all to do with a happy ever after, really, of sorts, although of course this play is ambiguous. We think of that word happy, we have to ask ourselves who is actually happy. Lucentio begins by saying everything has gone over, everything's blown over, everything is resolved, and they're now going to sit and have a nice party, 3 married couples, and there's a celebratory atmosphere with lots of unity of time and place, fueled by alcohol and nice food, meaning everybody is together. The whole cast is on stage for this scene, so the stage is very busy. This is also the scene where we get the wager, where the husbands are betting on the wives, which one will come out. Of course, Kate is the only one that comes out, and that is the first public sign that Kate is compliant in front of the other characters. And of course, Petruchio is stood there looking very glum and sly and kind of cocky, really, because he has clearly been victorious in Kate's taming. And the play ends with Kate's monologue, which is the only time in the play where a female character talks at length. Ironically, though, she's not doing that freely, she's doing it because Petruchio has wanted her to give that kind of monologue to the widow, and Bianca, who is also a bit more disobedient at this point. And in that monologue, again, I'm going to do a separate video for the monologue, but in that monologue, essentially, she lectures all women about how stupid they are and how unattractive they are for not respecting their husbands and not appreciating what the husbands put themselves through in order to keep their wives safe at home. So that monologue really does show gender stereotypes, women being soft and emotional, men being strong and courageous. Of course, what we have to debate is the extent to which Kate has actually been tamed, whether she genuinely believes what she's saying here, or whether or not she's just saying it because she thinks she has to, because it keeps Petruchio happy. So again, there's a degree of ambiguity there to bear in mind as well. And the play ends actually with Lucentio saying, "'Tis a wonder that she was ever tamed so," meaning, has she actually been tamed? Is it even possible to tame somebody like this? Or is she just playing Petruchio at his own game? So we don't really know. It's for audiences to make up their own minds. Some actresses play the monologue ironically or sarcastically, almost tongue-in-cheek, suggesting that Kate has got the upper hand here. And some actresses play Kate's monologue as more sombre, as if she has actually been tamed and she's a broken victim. So again, it depends on the production you see. It depends on what you think as well as an audience interpreting this art form, which is what it is. Okay, so those are the 14 scenes of Shrew. I hope that was useful. Just giving you a general overview of what happens when, in terms of a wider narrative. Thank you very much, and good luck with your studies.